Welcome to Better Health Guy Blogcasts, empowering your better health. And now, here's Scott, your Better Health Guy. The content of this show is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or cure any illness or medical condition. Nothing in today's discussion is meant to serve as medical advice or as information to facilitate self-treatment. As always, please discuss any potential health-related decisions with your own personal medical authority.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 44 of the Better Health Guy blogcast series. Today's guest is Dr. Bob Miller, and the topic of the show is Lyme Genomics. Bob Miller is a certified traditional naturopath specializing in the field of natural health, including genetic-specific nutrition, homeopathy, stress reduction, detoxification, and education. He's earned his naturopathic degree from Trinity School of Natural Health and is board certified. In 1993, Bob Miller opened the Tree of Life practice, and he's served as a traditional naturopath for over 20 years. For the past several years, he's been engaged with genetic variants and related research. Working with many clients, he is astounded at how many people's health concerns are related to the genetic issues. For Bob, following a natural approach to health is personal. It was during a personal health crisis in 1993 that he experienced firsthand the profound effects of natural remedies as a solution to regain his own health. His passion to help others and to learn more catapulted him in his desire to obtain knowledge in the natural health and wellness field. He is committed to educating others, empowering them to have more control over their health care and their lives. He's found naturopathic philosophies of working with the mind, body, and spirit in a natural approach to be the best way to help others. Recognizing that there was not a nutritional supplement line on the market comprehensive enough to address all of the possible genetic variants, he began working with a national company, Professional Health Products, to formulate an epigenetics line of products for use by healthcare providers. Bob lectures at nationwide seminars to educate physicians and healthcare practitioners about genetic variants and nutritional supplementation for achieving optimal health, and he's created an online certification course in genetic nutrition for health professionals. He has created a proprietary software program, MethylGenetic Nutrition Analysis, which he uses in his practice to assess, analyze, and design support for his clients based upon their personal genetics, lab work, and presenting symptoms. To support his growing genetic research efforts, Bob founded the NutriGenetic Research Institute in 2015 to research and publish reports on the relationship between genetic variants and labs and presenting symptoms. His first research project on genetic variants and Lyme disease won an award for research at the International Lyme Conference held in Helsinki, Finland in June 2016. And now my interview with Dr. Bob Miller. I am very excited today to learn about common genetic variants and the challenges they cause in those with chronic Lyme disease from Dr. Bob Miller. Thanks for being here, Dr. Miller.
My pleasure. Looking forward to it.
Yeah, me as well. So tell us a little about your background, how you moved from one career to another as a result of your own health challenges, and what ultimately drew you into the world of Lyme disease.
Sure. Well, I was in my early 30s, an executive in telecommunications, and came down with a serious case of ulcerative colitis. Was in the hospital for 21 days. I'll never forget when I lost half my blood and then I hemorrhaged. And I thought, I think this might be over. Wasn't sure if I'd see the morning. And they told me that colon's got to come out. No, I'm of Pennsylvania Dutch origin. We're known to be a little bit on the stubborn side. So I decided that I'd like to try some other things. And of course, the gastroenterologist said, you're crazy. You're going to be in the hospital 2 to 3 weeks out of the year. You'll be begging me to cut this out. And I'm a little past my mid-30s right now. I'm 62. And my colon is doing fine. I had no thought that I would get involved in natural health. Just became interested for my own benefit. Found I was absolutely fascinated. And then that old adage, you get to the top of the ladder and you find you're on the wrong roof. So I just was totally fascinated by natural health. Again, started to study a little bit, got a naturopathic degree, and now I'm just a traditional naturopath where we don't diagnose, treat, prescribe, which we, coach people on how to be healthier lives. And about 7 or 8 years ago, became very interested in genetics, just fell in love with it because of the logic behind it, the solid biochemistry. And Lyme was an interesting foray. I never had it. No one in my family ever had Lyme disease. But a lady who did graphic artist work for me had Lyme disease. And she said, would you come speak at our local Lyme support group? Sure. So I spoke on, a little bit of methylation, a little bit of genetics. And, of course, a couple people came to see me. They had some good results. Of course, social media has now changed everything. So they started talking on social media, and all of a sudden I started hearing from people across the country. And rather than seeing people just locally, I started doing Skype and phone calls. And then I started discovering patterns. And it was like, okay, these people are all looking the same. So then I learned about ILADS, the International Lyme Disease Association, and they were having research work done. So they're asking for abstracts. So, it's kind of ironic now. I said to somebody, so what's an abstract? So we did an abstract on our findings, which was that there was some mineral imbalance in those with chronic Lyme. I went off to Helsinki, Finland, won the award for research. And that's how I then began to have the journey of looking at Lyme. And as I'm sure we'll talk through the show, we did 3 more abstracts. And as of this recording, we just submitted the 4th abstract to hopefully present as a poster at the United States Lyme Conference being held in November in Boston, where we kind of tied it all together.
Very nice. I will see you in Boston at ILADS. That's going to be a fantastic event.
Yes.
So you've been involved in this work around genetic variants and those things that are commonly present, specifically in Lyme disease. So tell us a little about how you conducted your research that kind of led you to the realization that certain genetic issues were more prevalent in Lyme disease.
Sure. Well, let's go first back to traditional naturopathic philosophy. The medical world is based upon find a disease, give a drug to treat the disease. And this goes all the way back to Antoine Béchamp, who is considered the father of medicine. He said to Louis Pasteur at the time, Louis, you're right, there's a germ, but I think there's an environment that allows that pathogen to thrive. So I would be considered like a classic naturopath. We look at the environment. We look at the terrain. We're not licensed medical doctors, so we don't treat disease. We just coach people on how to build their health naturally. So the premise of traditional naturopathy is that everything begins with inflammation. And it's interesting how, naturopaths were viewed as, those quacks that probably ought to be in jail, to now those naturopathic philosophies being actually embraced by modern science. Just in the last week, an article was published, a peer-reviewed study that showed all these people that are having depression and anxiety. It may not be that they need some drug for their balancing their neurotransmitters, but they need to deal with inflammation in the brain. Our brains are becoming inflamed. And when you look at the rise of autism, when you look at the rise of diabetes, some scary things are happening out there. And I'm not some sky is falling kind of person, looking for the next disaster, but there's a lot of serious things that are occurring that are quite frightening. And there appears to be a inflammatory component to many of those. So again, we go back to the naturopathic philosophy of inflammation. And just briefly, inflammation occurs when free radicals exceed your antioxidant capacity. So free radicals occur when an electron spins out of control and it does some damage if it hits a cell. Now, we're amazing organisms. We make our own antioxidants. And we'll be talking about them during the podcast, but a couple of them are catalase, glutathione, superoxide dismutase. We make those. And if we don't make enough of them because of genetic weakness, or we're chewing them up because there's some excess inflammation going on that has to be neutralized, the body then becomes inflamed. So me set that as the stage of what we see going on. Now let's go to Lyme disease. Some people get bit by a tick. They don't even know it because their immune system fights it off. Other people get bit by a tick. They do some antibiotics from their physician, and they're fine. And then other people do the antibiotics, and they're not fine. They get worse. They continue to do antibiotics. They're worse. They're getting sicker and sicker. And those are the people that I work with. I mean, for the people who, one round of antibiotics clears them up, I never hear from them. I hear from the people who have gone to one doctor after another, tried all kinds of antibiotics, and they seem to be getting nowhere. So those are the people that, called me and said, I'm not sure if a naturopath is a quack, but we're desperate to try something. So what we found in first study was that genetically, almost by a 5-to-1 ratio compared to the average person, they had genes that would cause them to absorb a little bit more iron. Specifically, they're called the HFE genes. Now, perhaps people have heard of the disease hemochromatosis. That's when it's really serious. That's when you have like homozygous variants or variants from both parents, and you have a lot of genetic issues, and you absorb way too much iron. And if that's not taken care of, and usually the only remedy is phlebotomy, just taking blood on a regular basis. If that's not done, the person can become deathly ill. And we're not talking about hemochromatosis here. We're talking about people that are like carrier status, just have one of the genes, and they absorb a little bit more iron. Not enough to be hemochromatosis, but a little bit more. And then what can happen is, and that was my first study, that I found that people with chronic Lyme disease had a 5.03 times higher hemochromatosis genes, causing them to absorb a little bit more iron. Now, you would think that blood tests would show that if you're absorbing a little more iron, you're going to have some in the blood. And of course, under normal conditions, that'll happen. The iron will go up, the ferritin will go up, and you can see that, there's a little bit too much iron. However, there's a fascinating process called the Fenton reaction, Fenton, where the iron and or the copper will combine with something called hydrogen peroxide, and it will make something called hydroxyl radicals, HYDROXYL radicals. These are nasty son of a guns, and they do nothing but chew you up and spit you out. So this extra iron comes in and combines with the hydrogen peroxide and makes these hydroxyl radicals, which then makes you more inflamed, more toxic. You can then also make another molecule called peroxynitrite that further suppresses your immune system. So one of the things I'm finding over and over when I talk to people, and it doesn't matter whether it's Lyme, whether it's Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, or just overwhelming fatigue that no one can seem to find, we oftentimes see this pattern of slightly overabsorption of iron, and then it combines with other molecules in the Fenton reaction, makes these hydroxyl radicals. And those hydroxyl radicals will impact your mitochondria's ability to make ATP. All that inflammation will make you predispositioned to have heavy metals, make you predispositioned to let other viruses grow inside the body. So that was our first study. But in addition to that, we also found that people with chronic Lyme also had higher levels of something called glutamate. Now, glutamate is an absolutely fascinating molecule. Glutamate is what makes you smart, makes you motivated, makes you a high achiever. But if it goes too high, it can make you inflamed. And that inflammation will turn into more peroxynitrite, and then that will make more inflammation, lower your ATP, and unfortunately, ATP is needed to turn glutamate into something very restful called GABA. So if you've got excess glutamate and deficient GABA, you're going to become more anxious, and you're going to become more inflamed. And as we dug, we found that excess glutamate will make peroxynitrite, which makes more inflammation, suppresses the cells even more, and suppresses the immune system, and it becomes one vicious cycle. So that was study number one. Higher levels of iron absorption, higher levels of glutamate creating this inflammatory cascade that just puts you into this downward spiral that people just don't know how to dig their way out of.
Wow. That's a lot to take in. And it's very interesting because I think that the iron issue particularly, I commonly see people getting tested for iron and ferritin and often then being given supplemental iron. And maybe that may not always be the ideal scenario given what you're talking about here.
I see that often. In other words, if you take the typical approach of if you have low iron, take iron. And I also train doctors how to do this. I travel all over the country with 3-day seminars training doctors how to do genetic nutrition. And one of the things I keep emphasizing is be very careful. Obviously, if somebody has a bleeding disorder, if they've got some reason why they're losing the blood, there's some reason why they're not making it, different story. But oftentimes we see iron combining with hydrogen peroxide, making hydroxyl radicals. Then if you throw more iron into it, you can feel worse. And for these people who have this pattern, I often ask them that. Did anyone ever see that you had low iron, give you iron, and you felt worse? And it's like, oh my God, yeah. They told me I'm low in iron, I'll feel so much better, and they felt horribly. Now, clearly there are people who, iron is a lifesaver. I mean, there's people across the world dying of iron deficiency, of anemia. And if they don't get some iron very quickly, they're going to die. But here in America, particularly people of Northern European descent, I find it particularly among the Ashkenazi Jews, people of English descent, Irish descent, Russian descent, there seems to be more of these hemochromatosis genes in that group. And if they're absorbing more iron and they're not clearing their hydrogen peroxide and making hydroxyl radicals, there are instances where taking more iron is throwing fuel on the fire.
So I will have a couple more questions on the iron topic, but I wanted to step back just for a second and talk about your perspective on genetics versus epigenetics. So as I understand, genes don't change that rapidly or rapidly enough to explain the rapid rise in these chronic illnesses that we're seeing today. So is it really a genetic issue, or is it that there's more of an epigenetic trigger that's causing genes to express in the direction that is not supportive of health?
Yes, well, I would agree with that completely. I didn't coin this phrase, but genetics loads the gun, environment pulls the trigger. Now, the question I get asked about 3 times a day is, are these genes being expressed? Now, I'm going to give you a couple of examples. And let me just first say, we are in our infancy in genetic nutrition. Each year, we're going to look back and say, oh, last year weren't we quaint when we thought, fill in the blank.
Sure.
So these are Bob Miller's opinions as of September 2017. Okay. Let's take, for example, a gene that makes glutathione. We'll just look, for example, at the GSS gene. That is the gene that takes the cysteine, glycine, glutamine, glues it all together to make glutathione. And when people have genetic variants, and if you'd like, we can dig into that as well, when they have a defect or genetic variant in the genetics that tells the body how to make that enzyme, I tend to think that if you've got X number of genetic variants, your ability to make glutathione is decreased by some number, 10%, 20%, 30%. We really don't know. But I tend to think you were born that way, and that's the way it is. You are making X% less glutathione because of those genetic variants. Now, what happens is something comes along. You live next to a golf course where you're exposed to all kinds of pesticides. You're a smoker, or you're exposed to secondhand smoke. Or you're getting some polluted water. Or you're a mechanic where you've got your hands in grease. You're a beautician where you've, perhaps not well ventilated and you're getting all these fumes. Or you're being exposed to any number of pathogens that we don't even know exist. It was just this week a report came out that said 84% of the world's water supply now has plastic fibers in it. We have no idea what that's going to do to us. So we are living in a pro-inflammatory world right now. I tend to believe that our genetics are no different today than they were 200 years ago, 500 years ago. Probably nothing's changed genetically. But you take a person who has some genetic weakness in making their antioxidants, or they have a genetic pattern where they actually make more free radicals from their iron. Let's go back to the iron thing again. The government has decided that so that we're not anemic, we're going to put iron in a lot of foods. So some foods that never had iron in them now have iron added to them to make sure there's enough. If you're a poor person who gets one meal a day, if you're lucky, that iron can be life-saving. But if you've got those genetic variants that you absorb more iron, you're eating all the time, you can actually overwhelm it. So you can be producing more free radicals even by your diet. So my phase 4 study on Lyme disease, that I'm sure we'll get into in a little bit, is based upon the actual name of the paper is going to be those with chronic Lyme have a predisposition to genes that will increase something called mTOR that we'll get into. But this is all targeted now by environmental factors, the plastics, the bovine growth hormones, possibly even the EMF, the electromagnetic fields, the iron being put into foods, the monosodium glutamate being put into foods. There's some concern that possibly some pesticides might even disrupt our gut flora a little bit to increase the glutamate. And then, interestingly, genetics got known some time ago when we discovered the MTHFR gene. As soon as everybody talks about genetics, they want to talk about MTHFR. Mm-hmm. Do you have MTHFR?
It has a better marketing department than the other SNPs, I think.
Yeah, it does. I think it does. So what happens is people, do their genetic testing. They go to some online free genetic testing. They find they have MTHFR and they start taking methylfolate. Or when I train doctors, I train them, be very careful not to fall into the trap of just seeing if somebody has MTHFR and putting them on methylfolate. Because methylfolate stimulates new cell growth. Well, that can be a good thing unless you're already low in glutathione. So that's why folate can make you inflamed. We'll talk later about glutamate, and if you already have high glutamate and you don't turn glutamate into GABA, folate can actually stimulate the glutamate. So if someone inadvertently just thinks that I need to methylate, and by the way, I could speak for an hour on the importance of methylation, but if all we focus is on just that, and we tend to think that we're going to solve all our problems by taking some methyl B12 and methylfolate, many times all those good intentions can go awry, and you can end up doing more harm by giving methylfolate and methyl B12 too soon. So clearly, methylfolate's needed for new cells. We need to methylate. Got it. But if we do it too soon and too much, we can actually do more harm than good.
And I've heard other practitioners talk about the fact that stimulating methylation or supporting methylation at the wrong time can even lead to activation of viruses, that it can lead to a dumping of toxicity that the body may not quite be ready to respond to, that there can be many things that supporting methylation can actually make us feel worse.
Absolutely. There's a time for everything.
Right.
And I'm going to be announcing the very near future. I'm not ready to announce it yet, but we're going to be looking at a pulsing program where perhaps you support methylation 1 to 2 days a week only, then support your ability to make antioxidants to neutralize those. And then we'll get to later my latest research that I think is extremely exciting, and that is an imbalance of what's called mTOR and autophagy, where the body doesn't clean. And folate stimulates the growth of new cells, but then it weakens the body's ability to clean. And I think that's why we're making a mistake. All of these things we're doing in our environment right now are stimulatory. So back to your original question of, genetics versus epigenetics. I'm now kind of like 35% genetics, 65% environment. Now, one other instance, though, that is a little bit different, and that is histamine. As you know, there's many people that are having histamine intolerance, or they're having the mast cell issues.
Big topic.
Huge,
yep.
Big topic. So there are, and there's a little confusion on this. There's the DAO genes that make the dynamine oxidase, which people think is related to histamine, but it's not. It's the ABP1 genes that make the enzyme that breaks down histamine. So many people say, oh, I've got DAO, therefore I've got a histamine problem. No, if you have DAO, you have a glutamate problem. But the ABP1 genes make the DAO enzyme that breaks down histamine. Many people have genetic variants there. So they don't break down histamine foods. So what do? Their stomach's not doing well. They're not feeling well. Some well-meaning person says, oh, you need to do some fermented foods. Do some, kombucha. Do some miso.
Mm-hmm.
Eat some fermented foods. And for those people, that's, again, throwing fuel on the fire. Now, there's the HNMT genes that also break down histamine. Now, to do that, they have to be methylated. So they need a methyl group, SAMe, acetyl-methionine, to break down the histamine. Now, this is where we are talking about expression. So if something impedes the methylation process, which even includes, interestingly, the hydroxyl radicals, found one paper was digging and digging, those hydroxyl radicals will impede the production of SAMe, which is what you use to methylate. So if you've got all these hydroxyl radicals going on and you're not making your SAMe, you don't have the SAMe you need for the HNMT genes to do their job. So you can have absolutely no genetic issues with your HNMT genes. And if you don't have the SAMe to do it, then that cofactor that's needed. So genes need a cofactor to make something to happen. So if you don't have any SAMe, even if your HNMT is working perfectly, you're not going to break down your histamine, and you're going to have all these histamine reactions. So I see a lot of people with histamine responses, and they don't even know that they're having that.
It's definitely a big topic. It seems like quite a few people are dealing with mast cell activation and histamine-related issues. I wanted to talk a little bit about the chronic infections themselves, especially since we're talking about Lyme. Is it possible that Lyme and other chronic infections actually themselves trigger a less than optimal expression of our SNPs, or do the SNPs lead to a sicker, quicker picture with Lyme exposure, or possibly both?
The answer is yes to both. Okay. So let's go back to Lyme disease. Many of these people have difficulty turning glutamate into GABA. Glutamate's excitatory, GABA's relaxing. So that's where it makes them very intelligent, highly motivated, hardworking people, the perfectionists that you can be counted on. If you want to hire somebody, you want somebody with high glutamate because they're going to get the job done. Okay. So they already have high glutamate, which then can cause inflammation and weaken the immune system. So when you get Epstein-Barr, chronic fatigue, Lyme, that lowers the amount of ATP, the energy inside the cell. ATP is needed to turn glutamate into GABA. So therefore, when you get an infectious disease, that glutamate to GABA conversion gets impaired, and that leads to more glutamate. And it just becomes a self-fulfilling circular. So the bacteria or the virus that slows down the ATP production makes the genetic issues worse, but many times the genetic issues were there in the first place. So it's, again, those two things together. It's the genetic predisposition followed by the epigenetic insult that comes along that causes it to happen. And I think that's why when people get older, they many times get more anxious and worrisome because their ATP is going down, their glutamate's going up.
So let's come back a little bit to the iron issue. So we talked about the fact that many people with Lyme test low in iron, that supplementation is often recommended. So how do we decide whether or not that supplementation might be appropriate? Is it by looking at their HFE genes and then coming to some conclusion based on their genetic potential for iron absorption?
Sure. Well, one of my favorite sayings is, this is like a 3D chess game played underwater. Everyone's looking for simple solutions. Oh, do I have the BRCA gene that means I'm going to get breast cancer? Do I have the APOE that means I'm going to get dementia, Alzheimer's? Yeah. So there was almost a joke in there.
I thought you did that on purpose, actually.
You caught it. So very good. Yes. Yeah, very good. And now I lost my train of thought. No, I'm going right back. So we're looking for, we're looking for the simple solutions. Okay. And so what happens then is that, people, geneticists are now confused. They're saying, now, wait a minute, there's people that have the BRCA genes and they don't get cancer. And there's people that have the APOEs and they're mentally sharp into their early 90s. So what's going on here? I don't think we're going to find a simple solution. Everyone's looking for, do I have that gene? Like MTHFR. Do I have MTHFR? I don't. I'm okay. Oh my God, I've got it. I'm terrible. That's absurd. I mean, some of the sickest people I've seen don't have MTHFR. Like, as I said, I almost died in my mid-30s. I don't have MTHFR. Okay. And I see people that do have MTHFR that are doing just fine. Okay. So I tend to think it's the perfect storm that comes together. So are there people that have HFE genes and they absorb a little more iron and they're doing perfectly fine? You betcha. Are there some people that absorb a little bit more and they're doing terrible? You betcha. So let's think this through. And again, we're going to hopefully not make this too difficult with biochemistry here. But there's multiple factors that go together. In addition to iron, many times people are also making more glutamate. The two of those together make more inflammation. Then we have to look at how are we making our antioxidants. And one of my areas of research right now that's very heavy is in the NRF2 and KEAP1. Talk about those a little bit. So to understand these guys, think of in a building, you have a sprinkler system. And the sprinkler sits up in the ceiling, and it's got a water pipe behind it. And it sits there and does absolutely nothing until a fire comes along. And when the fire comes along, it lets loose the water and puts out the fire. Interestingly, we have the equivalent of that in every one of our cells. I mean, what a complex organism we are. We have what's called the KEAP1, which is the sprinkler, and the NRF2, in a rough sense, is like the water. And when the body senses this inflammation, KEAP1 says, NRF2, go do your thing. It stimulates something called the antioxidant response element, which then gives out SOD, glutathione, catalase to put out the fire, so to speak. So one of the things I'm seeing is the people that are the sickest of the sick, the ones who can't get on top of it. I've been to every clinic. Nobody can figure out what's going on. They have genetic variants on their KEAP1 and NRF2 genes, in addition to the iron genes. So it's that combination.
So let's wrap up a couple more questions on the iron, and then we'll move on to phase 2 and phase 3. So some Lyme and co-infections actually utilize iron to their benefit. Lyme uses more, Borrelia uses more manganese, but other infections tend to use iron. So does having these HFE variants that might lead to higher levels of iron in the body, does that potentially benefit these microbes, or is it a reason that we might then have higher levels of chronic infections?
Well, I can't say that I'm an expert on how those HFE genes affect feeding the pathogen. So I'll have to leave that to someone else who that's their level of expertise.
Okay.
But I do know that as we create those hydroxyl radicals, we're again depleting our glutathione. We're now allowing heavy metals to build up. We're now weakening the immune system. So we're making an environment that is more friendly for the pathogen to thrive.
So what is the connection between iron and glutamate, and how does that then tie in with people that say they always respond poorly to their Lyme treatment protocols?
Okay. Well, what happens is the hydroxyl radicals made by the iron deplete your glutathione. The glutamate makes peroxynitrite, which depletes your glutathione. Now, glutathione is needed to clear hydrogen peroxide. And perhaps I ought to back up there just a little bit. When we get a free radical, it combines with oxygen to make what's called a superoxide free radical. Then we need something called SOD, superoxide dismutase, to turn that into hydrogen peroxide. Then we need catalase and glutathione to turn that into water and oxygen. So if we are depleting our glutathione from hydroxyl radicals, and from peroxynitrite, that hydrogen peroxide stays high. That then combines with the iron to make the hydroxyl radicals. And then that peroxynitrite weakens your immune system, makes you more toxic, makes you more susceptible to an environment that'd be friendly to not only Lyme, but any pathogen that wants to come along.
So, looking at the iron issue, then, do we need to address the fact that we're absorbing too much iron? Do we need to address the fact that there's a reduced ability for the iron to be carried out of the cells? Do we need to address the hydroxyl radical issue, or do we need to work on all of these things?
I would say it's all of the above. Now, I'm glad you mentioned one other part on iron. And in our phase 3 study, and we can talk more about the phase 3, but in the phase 3, we found there was more genetic variance in a gene called the SLC40A1. And that is what makes something called ferroportin. And ferroportin carries iron out of the cells. And what I continually find, again, my Lyme study concluded that those who are chronically ill had more genetic variance in the SLC40A1s, plus the HFE. So they're absorbing more iron. It's getting stuck inside the cell and creating hydroxyl radicals. And there's a lot more genes that are involved in making glutathione that we found in chronic Lyme as well. So what are we to do about it? Well, the first thing that I'm now doing, and again, we're learning. I mean, as I say, each year we're going to look back and say, wasn't it quaint what we knew last year? But one of the first things I look at is support the body in reducing hydrogen peroxide. And we do that with catalase, rhodiola, tocotrienols from vitamin E. All those will help take down excess peroxynitrite. And that's, to my knowledge, never a bad idea. Then I'm sure many people are aware that hydrogen water has become quite popular. This is where you drop a pill into a bottle of water and you let it fizz. And as we all know, water is H2O. And then what happens is the pill knocks some of the hydrogen loose. We drink the water, and biochemistry 101, OH minus plus H2 equals H2O. So we're then taking those hydroxyl radicals and turning them into water. And you know that's working because if it does its job, all of a sudden you're urinating up a storm. You know, you're running to the restroom all the time.
And is that a selective antioxidant, meaning that if you need some oxidation for managing things like cancers and infections and things of that nature, does that potentially produce a problem in that you can reduce the oxidation too much, or does that not happen with hydrogen?
Well, that's a good point. The body uses the superoxide free radical. It uses hydrogen peroxide sometimes to do some good things. So that we call that the antioxidant paradox, that in theory, you could take too many antioxidants. Now, I think in today's world, with all the oxidative stress, that'd be pretty hard to do.
Okay.
But in theory, you could take too many antioxidants and you would not have what you need to attack. In other words, hydrogen peroxide and superoxide sometimes do play a vital role in killing virus and bacteria and killing cancer cells. The interesting thing about hydroxyl radicals is they serve no good purpose. They're not helpful at all. So hydrogen water is selective, that it only selects the hydroxyl radicals. So you don't have to worry that you're taking too many antioxidants.
So what are some of the other things that we do to reduce the absorption of iron? And I've heard you mention before that things like coffee and black tea and red wine can potentially be helpful in this arena as well. Is that correct?
Sure. Well, the red wine is resveratrol, which is related to mTOR, we'll get to later. But coffee and or tea with the meals can slow down the absorption. Now, again, many times people inadvertently are cooking with cast iron skillets. And sometimes when people are not feeling well, they're taking massive amounts of vitamin C. Now, clearly we need vitamin C. We don't make it. And if we don't have enough, we're going to be in a problem. But again, there's this balance point. There's a bell curve. There can be too much or too little of virtually everything. And if we take too much vitamin C, we can absorb more iron. Again, it goes back to iron. If we don't have iron, we're in a boatload of trouble. But if we get too much iron, it oxidizes, and again, we're in a boatload of trouble. Bell curve just about on everything. A good analogy I give is, if you don't have water, you've got a couple of days until you're done. If you drink 4 to 5 gallons a day, you're probably going to wash out your electrolytes and your heart will stop. So there's a sweet spot for everything. Cholesterol. No cholesterol, your brain's going to stop. You're not going to make your hormones.
Right.
Too much cholesterol, you're going to clog up the arteries if they oxidize. So we tend to put things in categories of good or bad. And many times there isn't. There's too little or too much.
So when we look at the HFE issues and the higher levels of hydroxyl radicals, what does that mean for treatments like ozone, IV vitamin C? I mean, does that potentially mean that people that have these variants and are expressing a higher level of hydroxyl radicals may not want to then do other oxidative therapies?
Absolutely. Yeah, I've seen many people do well on those oxidative therapies and many other people complete train wreck. And the ones that are the complete train wrecks are the ones who many times have this pattern. So if you already have too much hydrogen peroxide and you're not clearing it, and I'd also like to mention there's actually GPX genes that are the ones that are directly related to glutathione being used to clear hydrogen peroxide. It's amazing when you start digging into this. There's a whole other set of genes I'm analyzing that are related to how the body clears hydrogen peroxide. Wow. So you can have numerous things that go wrong. So when you put ozone in, that's O3, that's going to make put a demand on your superoxide dismutase. Now you will hear some people say ozone may not be a good idea if you've got a lot of SOD variants. So the genes SOD2 and SOD3 make superoxide dismutase. And if you have a lot of genetic variants there, the ozone may just make a lot of peroxynitrite and again work against you. So that all takes us back to there's no one size fits all. The trend of healthcare has to be personalized. It's got to be individualized for the person. If somebody says, I treat fill in the blank by doing fill in the blank, many times it doesn't work some of the time. So if you don't have an iron issue and you don't have a hydrogen peroxide issue, the ozone therapy may be the miracle that you were looking for. So, I'm not opposed to ozone. I'm not opposed to hydrogen peroxide therapy. I'm not opposed to vitamin C. But if you've got a pattern that you're massively, I'll never forget, I spoke to a young lady who had this iron pattern. And I said, I'd be really, careful with this. And also, we can talk about this a little bit later, even taking glutathione can work against you. And if you like, would you like to address that right now? It might be a good time to do that because it's related to iron. Sure. Yeah, sure. So we all know that glutathione is the master antioxidant. And studies were done that shows that when they looked at people that are 105 to 110 and doing well, they had the average glutathione levels of the average 50-year-old. So your glutathione levels are going to determine basically how long you're going to live from, many perspectives. So having good glutathione levels is a darn good idea. So one would think taking glutathione has got to really be beneficial. And when I see this pattern of the iron, and if someone has a genetic pattern that they don't make glutathione adequately, one of the ingredients called cysteine will start building up. And cysteine is what combines with iron in the first step of making hydroxyl radicals. So if you are not making glutathione because you've got some genetic issues, including NRF2 and KEAP1, and I do want to spend more time on that if we can, then you are going to be building up your cysteine. So you start taking glutathione and you feel wonderful. It's like, woohoo, this is great. Then the body says, oh, cool, I don't need to make my own, and we start sparing cysteine. The cysteine then starts combining with the iron, and all of a sudden, this master antioxidant makes us worse. And talk about mind-boggling, And a story I know that's very sad, I saw a young lady with this pattern, and I said, if anybody ever tries to tell you to do vitamin C glutathione, I'd be very cautious. And she went ahead and did it, and she ended up in a wheelchair and very ill for a long period of time. Because the vitamin C jacked up the iron, started sparing cysteine, and we made more hydroxyl radicals.
So in some cases, then when we're taking glutathione as an antioxidant, we are potentially actually increasing oxidation as a result of the cysteine leading to higher levels of hydroxyl radicals. Did I understand that
isn't that ironic?
It is ironic. Especially for how much that stuff often costs.
Yeah, exactly.
So did we cover phase 1 fairly well? Anything that we left? Okay. So I know phase 3 is the real exciting one, and I know we want to get there. So not to ignore phase 2, which was around neurotransmitters and dopamine receptors and things of that nature. Is there anything that we want to say about phase 2?
Yeah, I can probably wrap this up in about 60 seconds because it was interesting, but it just reinforced a little bit more strongly what we found in phase 1. And we just found more pathways leading to higher glutamate. And we also found a relationship to the dopamine receptor sites. And the dopamine receptor sites are also involved with immunity. And we haven't dug deeply into this. There's probably more research that can be done there, but it just reinforced the fact that there is a strong glutamate component, I think, to a lot of conditions. And I think it's being overlooked in how we try to help people get well that are just chronically ill, that can't seem to get to the bottom of what's going on. Let me talk about another contraindication. So what happens then, many of these people have inflamed intestinal tracts. So some well-meaning person says, oh, you need to take L-glutamine because that will heal your gut. Or you need to do some bone broth, and that bone broth is going to heal. Well, that glutamine will turn right into glutamate and can actually make more inflammation. So again, I'm not anti-glutamine. I'm not anti-bone broth. We have to get back to personalized care. And actually, bone broth or L-glutamine can do harm. And how many people, they tell me they tell their health practitioner their intestinal tract is sore, and I'm going to fix that by giving you this L-glutamine powder. And some people get better, some people get worse,
right.
Which goes back to personalized care is what we have to be doing.
So let's talk about phase 3. So keep 1, NRF2, mTOR, and autophagy. And we've touched on some of these, but I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about what you found related to these specifically in people with Lyme disease.
Sure. So again, in phase 3, we wanted to expand what we were looking at. So this is where we found the ferroportin gene. Now, we didn't find that in study number 1. We expanded what we were looking at, and we found the ferroportin gene being significantly higher in those with chronic Lyme. And then there's also another set of genes called the XCT. And these are the genes that allow cystine to come into the cell to make cysteine and take glutamate out. More genetic variants there. Interesting, glutamate once again. Okay. Now, one of the things we started looking at was NRF2 and KEAP1 and mTOR. And earlier in the year, when we found that there was more genetic variants in the mTOR, my first reaction is, wonder what mTOR is. So didn't know what it was. Okay. Now, I'd known about NRF2 and KEAP1 for some time. So let's go back to those. We spoke about how KEAP1 controls NRF2 like the sprinkler. NRF2 is responsible for making, utilizing, and recycling glutathione. It's also involved with making NADPH, which is the first step of reducing hydrogen peroxide, and also what the oxidized glutathione is used to turn back into good glutathione reduced. We should mention that glutathione is called reduced glutathione. After it neutralizes a free radical, it becomes an oxidized glutathione, and then we need to recycle it back to being reduced again. NADPH plays that role. Interestingly, NRF2 controls NADPH production. And then also, NRF2 is involved with sequestration of iron, so iron regulation. So it's like, whoa, look at all these things coming together. It's involved also with all the genes that clear your hydrogen peroxide.
Wow.
So when you've got difficulty with NRF2, you're going to have trouble making, utilizing, recycling glutathione. You're going to have trouble sequestering your iron. You're going to have trouble making NADPH, which helps clear your hydrogen peroxide, recycles your glutathione. And you can see why I'm now beginning to believe that NRF2 and KEAP1 are critical genes to be looking at. And I'm finding the sickest of the sick, the people that are 32 years old, can't get out of bed, have been to every clinic and nobody can help them. They have serious genetic variants in the NRF2 and KEAP1.
So that was actually my next question, which was you had commented earlier that the KEAP1 and NRF2, that people that had variants in those specific issues were the sickest of the sick. So how do we then stimulate KEAP1 and NRF2 to do all of those things that you just talked about?
Sure. Well, one of the most exciting things to come around is sulforaphane. And that comes from broccoli. Remember, Grandma told us to eat our broccoli. The highest amount appears to be in broccoli seed. So when we get broccoli seed called broccoraphane, that is the highest amount of sulforaphane there is. I'm also using a little bit of dong quai and rhodiola to support keep 1. And NRF2 is stimulated by things such as milk thistle, bacopa, resveratrol. All of those things support NRF2. So for many people, supporting NRF2 and keep 1 is critical. I'd also like to mention, just from an anti-aging standpoint, if you're a healthy person and you want to improve the chances of healthy aging, in my opinion, in this environment that we're living today, supporting NRF2 and keep 1 is critical. Now, we spoke earlier about, there is some danger of taking possibly too many antioxidants. The incredible part of NRF2 and keep 1, the body has incredible knowledge inside it to know what to do. So I think we're much better off to support the body's innate intelligence to do what it needs to do, rather than just dumping tons of antioxidants in.
So is it true then that we can't really overstimulate keep 1 and NRF2, or is there a potential for doing too much support in that arena?
Well, I don't know. I don't know that. Maybe somebody else does.
Okay.
But I would tend to think that when all we do is give the body nutrients that it uses, we're not like stimulating it. It isn't like we're giving some strong drug.
Right.
The body uses sulforaphane to do that. Can we push it too hard? I don't know. The only controversy with NRF2 is, and this is in theory, if someone has cancer, already has an active cancer, and the body is using like hydrogen peroxide or nitric oxide to kill it, there is some concern NRF2 could protect the cancer cell as well. Now, we don't know for sure. However, not having the antioxidants is what creates the inflammation that causes cancer. So again, it's this interesting catch-22.
And so the sulforaphane stimulates both keep 1 and NRF2. Did I understand that correctly?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay, fantastic. So let's talk a little bit about mTOR and autophagy. So what is mTOR? What is autophagy? And if mTOR then is stimulated, does that automatically mean that autophagy is slowed, or do they work independently of one another?
Well, let's do a little definition first, because I'm sure a lot of people listening to this have no idea what we're talking about. So mTOR stands for mammalian target of rapamycin. And in the simplest form, and there are like 17,000 papers written on this. So, and I don't claim to be the expert on mTOR. But what we're learning is that mTOR is how the body takes fats and proteins and makes new cells. Clearly, that's very important. If that didn't happen, the sperm and the egg would never become the baby would never become the adult. So we need mTOR to make growth happen. Now, the other thing that we have to look at is autophagy, and that's AUTOPHAGY. I think we're pronouncing that right.
We are pronouncing it correctly.
Yes. Some people say autophagy, but
it's autophagy.
It's autophagy, yes. It took me about 2 weeks to learn how to say that properly. Now, think of autophagy as the janitors. Okay. So what happens is, I'm sure everyone knows, that our cells are constantly dividing. So the cell's there, it does its job, it divides. The old cell through apoptosis has to die. And we don't think about, well, what happens to the old cell? Well, that old cell, autophagy means self-eating. So the old cell has to be reabsorbed. So the body actually reabsorbs that old cell, including the amino acids that are in there. So in a sense, it's kind of like a fuel. Now, I'm in Lancaster County, Pennsylvania. Lots of farmers here. And we talked to the farmers about, well, at the end of the season, the farmer plows the crop under, it rots, ferments, and provides the fertilizer for the spring planting. Same thing. When we absorb our cells and we get all that amino acids back into the body, we then use that to make the new cell. And that's what autophagy is. But autophagy also is cleaning up a virus and bacteria and mold. And I'm sure when I say the word mold, people start thinking, I know a lot of people that are super sensitive to mold. And we'll come back to that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So autophagy is cleanup. It's taking out all the bad things. Now, there's signaling molecules. And again, the signals that occur inside our body, again, we're just beginning to learn. However, when mTOR is active, think of that as the construction crew. It says to autophagy, take a break, guys, go home because we're building. And when we're done building, you can come out and clean. So there's an inverse relationship between mTOR and autophagy. So mTOR is doing its thing. Autophagy is put to sleep. Now, if you Google autophagy, Nobel Prize 2016, you'll see that a Nobel Prize was given in medicine and physiology to a Japanese researcher who was studying autophagy. And I think this is the smoking gun that we're missing. And that was my whole point of my phase 4 study. Now, we have to look at what stimulates mTOR. So what we're finding is they're stimulated by hormones. We talked about at the top of the podcast that a study showed that 84% of the world's water supply has plastic particles in it. We all know that those plastics are now estrogenic phytoestrogens or xenoestrogens, plus they're endocrine disruptors. So what have we done to the milk supply? Well, we found that if we give the dairy some bovine growth hormone, by golly, they'll give more milk and we can make more money. Growth hormone. Growth hormone stimulates mTOR. Estrogen stimulates mTOR. So a lot of people are on hormone replacement therapy and they're urinating. And that's going into the water supply. And now we're finding these hormones are in the water supply. So children are drinking water and getting, albeit small amounts, but they're getting small amounts of the hormones that people are taking. One of the areas that I think we've ignored for a while, but's getting some attention, is all the electromagnetic fields from the cell towers and the cell phones. We don't feel our cell phone. We don't know that it's there. But we're now constantly bathed in electromagnetic fields. It's almost impossible to get away from it. And for those of us who are older, when we were in our mother's womb, we weren't being exposed to all these electromagnetic fields. Right now, for the last 10, 12, and maybe 15 years, even in the mother's womb, as the brain was developing, we were being exposed to these electromagnetic fields. We have no idea what the long-term effects of that are.
So with mTOR, you mentioned the growth hormones. Is there also a connection between the iron and the glutamate and the stimulation of mTOR as well?
Absolutely. I'm going to get to that.
Okay.
So let's again go back to dairy. In addition to dairy having some of the growth hormones in, the purpose of milk is to take a baby, turn it into an adult. Dairy is to take this little calf, turn it into this huge cow in a short period of time. So 2 of the amino acids in there are leucine and arginine. Leucine and arginine stimulate mTOR. So that's why sometimes people will take arginine supplementation if they want to build muscle mass. So that's why bodybuilders will take amino acids, because amino acids stimulates mTOR. That's how you build new tissue. That's how you build muscle, by protein. However, if we get too much dairy, again, this all comes back to bell curve. So how many people are now thinking they're doing something good by every morning, maybe twice a day, having a protein shake? I'm not sure yet, but maybe not a good idea every day. Okay. Good. So particularly if it's high in methionine, leucine, or arginine, because methionine, there are studies that show that longevity is increased by methionine restriction, because that stimulates the SAMe, which then stimulates the SAMe, and the methionine stimulates mTOR. So possibly we're overdoing the protein. Now again, without protein, we shrivel up and die. We need protein. But we might be doing too much. And I think that's why some autistic children do very well when their parents take them off dairy, because the dairy is stimulating the mTOR. Now, insulin stimulates mTOR. So many years ago, 2% of the population was diabetic. Now 1 out of 3 are pre-diabetic or diabetic. Why? Well, we've done high fructose corn syrup. I can hardly get away from it if you don't eat things from the grocery store. Sodas, 12 teaspoons of sugar. Got to be kidding me. Okay. That stimulates the insulin, stimulates the mTOR. Then, as we discussed earlier, we're fortifying our foods with iron. Sometimes a good idea. If you want to be entertained or scared, go on YouTube and Google iron filings in cereal.
Oh, I've seen that, where the magnet literally pulls the iron to the magnet. Yeah, it's
Yes.
frightening.
Yeah. So last I heard, we don't chew on nails, but that's another story. So we're getting possibly too much iron. So if you have the HFE gene variants, and by the way, quickly back to iron, there's HMOX genes where we recycle our red blood cells. Genetic variants there will just, rather than recycle your red blood cells through the liver, you'll dump them into the body, and again, more iron. Then let's talk about glutamate. So what has the food industry done? They've put monosodium glutamate in our foods. Why? Because we get addicted to it. We like it. So now we're getting more glutamate. This is an area that we're not quite there yet. There's still some study, but it looks as though some pesticides disrupt the gut bacteria that are responsible for making our neurotransmitters. So there's the potential here that our gut biome is being upset by a lot of the chemicals that we're exposed to. Now, one of the interesting things we're seeing is inflammatory bowel disease is just skyrocketing among children. And also, we're now seeing rectal and colon cancers rising among young people. So we don't know yet why, but I mean, that's a fact that's happening. You know, to what degree is disruption of the biome by who knows what responsible for this? I mean, we're in the infancy of studying the biome. Then, as we spoke about earlier, there's a PON1 gene that clears pesticides. So if you've got PON1 genetic variants, you certainly might have more stimulation by pesticides. Back to the electromagnetic fields, there's also a CACNA1C gene that makes you more susceptible to electromagnetic fields. That's why some people are not imagining it when they're just really bothered by high amounts of electrical fields. And these people are like, made fun of. Yeah, sure, you're just making this up. They're not. They really are sensitive.
Right. Absolutely.
And then there's this trend of methylfolate. A lot of multiple vitamins are now coming out with methylfolate. People are taking their B vitamins with methylfolate. I think methylfolate's absolutely critical. If you're pregnant, you need methylfolate to get pregnant, to not have a miscarriage, and not have a deformed child. Folate's very important. But if you're not pregnant and possibly you've got some issues with glutamate or glutathione, you can overdo the folate and again stimulate the mTOR. So that's why you need iron when you're pregnant. That's why you need folate when you're pregnant. That's why dairy is a good idea, amino acids when you're pregnant, because you're making a new baby. But if you're not doing that and you're overstimulating the mTOR in multiple directions, you're overstimulating the mTOR, shutting down the autophagy. Now, interestingly, in our research, we've also dug out the autophagy genes, ULK1, ULK2, and the ATG13. And we are just wrapping up the research, but we are finding those people with chronic Lyme have more genetic variants in the autophagy genes.
So it sounds like there's many things that stimulate mTOR in the chronic illness, chronic Lyme disease community. Do we ever need to therapeutically stimulate it, or is it generally the case that we're looking to really do the opposite?
Yes. Let me also mention that this is a hot topic, and many pharmaceutical companies are looking for pharmacological ways to knock down mTOR in cancer. Again, mTOR doesn't cause cancer, but if you've got cancer, anything that stimulates growth is going to help the cancer cell grow as well. So there's a big movement towards trying to find some drugs that slow down mTOR. And actually, there is one. There is a drug called rapamycin that's used in people who have transplants, and it does slow down the mTOR. So one of the things we have to look at, if we do have ramped up mTOR, what can we do to slow that down? There's a huge interest, I mean, you hear it all the time, in intermittent fasting. Mm-hmm. And that is where you pick a block of time that you eat during the day, can be 8, 10, 12 hours, and then you're very careful to avoid any caloric stimulation during that rest time. Now, I think the reason that's so important is because, again, when you get amino acids, when you get iron, when you get folate, when you get insulin, you stimulate mTOR. The only thing that's ever been proven to increase longevity is caloric restriction. The only thing that's proven across all mammals, caloric restriction. Animal studies always find the same thing, 20 to 30% less calories, longer life. So we are eating too much. Okay. So as we eat too much, we're always stimulating mTOR. So intermittent fasting, and for example, I've just started doing this. I'll have breakfast at noontime. I won't have anything past 8 p.m. You can do 11 to 7, 10 to 6. Now, clearly there's people who have blood sugar issues and other reasons why they can't do that. But if you just Google intermittent fasting, lots of articles being discussed about it a lot. Now, there's other ways to do it. Some people think you need to be at the 22-hour mark to really kick autophagy in, so maybe 1 day a week fasting. I don't have a specific recommendation yet. I mean, we're still learning about this. But clearly, reducing or increasing the amount of time that you're not consuming calories during the day is going to support that process.
So if mTOR is oftentimes overstimulated, how do we then work on the autophagy side to make sure that we're optimizing that to do the cleanup side of the house?
Well, there's two things going on here. First, there's the caloric restriction. Caloric restriction, genetically, and in my class for doctors, where I explain this to them, and in my certification courses, we actually go through the genetic process of how caloric restriction will shut down the mTOR and allow the autophagy to do its thing. Interestingly, there are ways, natural ways, to slow down mTOR, and it's absolutely fascinating. Resveratrol slows down mTOR, and so does turmeric. Now, everybody knows that turmeric is anti-inflammatory. We just, turmeric, anti-inflammatory. But now we're seeing that, now maybe there's other properties, but one of the reasons why turmeric is anti-inflammatory, it slows down mTOR. So what do we know about people in India? They use a lot of turmeric. Cancer rates are lower. And what do we know about the French? They don't eat the best diet, but they're not obese, less heart disease. They're drinking a lot of wine, resveratrol. So resveratrol and turmeric slow down mTOR. On the other hand, vitamin D stimulates autophagy. So we all know the many reasons why we want to make sure our vitamin D levels are okay. And, I'm no expert on vitamin D, but we know there's a vitamin D immune relationship. Perhaps there's a process here that I'm not aware of, but I have to wonder if it's because we're supporting autophagy by the vitamin D, and that's why the vitamin D has so many health benefits to us. Berberine also stimulates autophagy through the AMPK gene, and so does lithium. So lithium, berberine, vitamin D stimulate the autophagy.
And is that lithium orotate?
Lithium orotate, yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And in the medical world, they'll give pharmaceutical doses of lithium for OCD. Mm-hmm. I don't know if anybody knows for sure the mechanism that it does that, but you could certainly make an argument that by slowing down the mTOR, which is also related to anxiety, perhaps that's the function. I just recently had a client of a young man who his OCD was so bad he can't eat, swallow, speak, or walk. And when I talked about this, spoke to the parents about lithium, and they said, oh yeah, when he was on lithium, he was perfectly normal. But we had to quit because that pharmaceutical grade was hurting his kidneys. And as soon as we stopped the lithium, he went back to the obsessive OCD. So there's probably multiple factors in here. And I'm not making a simplification that lithium is going to fix OCD. But it may be a factor that, lithium deficiency is a cause of impeded autophagy and then sped up mTOR. Now, interestingly, NRF2 and KEAP1 regulate mTOR and autophagy.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a wow.
You're having too much fun, I can tell.
Yes.
Wow, this is amazing. So would we say the same thing about using some of these natural agents to stimulate autophagy, that we likely aren't going to overstimulate it with these natural compounds.
Yeah, I doubt it.
Okay.
Again, when you look at the environment that we're living in today, the plastics, the dairy that has the hormones, the electromagnetic fields, the iron, the MSG. I am creating a theory, and just that. I'm not making a claim. I'm not making a statement. I'm developing a theory that these environmental factors may be overstimulating our mTOR and knocking down our autophagy. And this could be a significant factor in many of the health challenges we're seeing today. It's way too early, so I'm not making that statement claim. Just from a research standpoint, we're seeing some smoking guns. And, personally, I'd love to work with some universities or something like that and actually do some published studies. So we're not making that claim, saying that's for sure, but I think there's an obligation to say to folks, we need to start looking at this. Because there's too many smoking guns here that when people stop dairy, they feel better. When they, stop other things, they feel better. This may be a mechanism that a lot more research has to be put into.
Are there, actually, before I jump into that question, are there some other key things around the third phase of your work that we didn't touch on?
No, that pretty well covers it.
Okay.
And that there was NRF2, Keep One, everything together just was there. And to just bring it up to the stage 4, we're just going to tie it all together. We're just going to be adding in the autophagy genes this time and tie it all together. So I think the 4th study is kind of taking the iron, the glutamate, the NRF2, and now the autophagy genes. And my 4th paper is going to be that increased genetic variants that would increase mTOR and decrease autophagy found in chronic Lyme. So that's the only claim we're making, that the genetic variants are there.
Mm-hmm.
We're not in any position to say, oh yeah, that is happening. I'm using this as a springboard. I'd like to work with some universities and say, okay, let's get some people with their PhDs who are not just traditional naturopaths like myself and start digging into this, getting some published papers. So I think we found some interesting things. We can't jump to too many conclusions, but it'll certainly lead us to opportunities to do more research and hopefully find some solutions to some pretty serious problems that people are having.
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic. So we talked about several things that people perceive as being good that maybe there are some potential downsides to. We talked about glutamine, we talked about glutathione, we talked about bone broth, ozone, IV vitamin C. I'm wondering if there's some other supplements that people are commonly taking that lead you to have any concerns. And specifically, the one that was still not really discussed too much was, I'd like to hear your thoughts on NAC, because lots of people seem to be taking NAC, and I'm not sure that that's always a good thing either.
Yes. Yeah, there's 2 that I want to talk about, NAC and arginine. N-acetylcysteine, people would say, oh, you're inflamed, take some NAC. Now, the reason they do that is to boost glutathione. And glutathione is made from N-acetylcysteine, glycine, glutamine. So you're kind of making the jump that if you take more cysteine, you're going to make more glutathione. That's correct if NRF2 is working okay, if Keep One is working okay, and there's a myriad of genes that multiple factors happen to make your glutathione. If any of those factors are out of whack, there's the potential that taking N-acetylcysteine is just going to make more free radicals. So, and again, many people just inadvertently, first go to, you're inflamed, you need more glutathione, take NAC. Oversimplification, I believe. Now, can some people be incredibly helped by NAC? Well, of course. Again, I'm not anti-cysteine. If you've got the genetic pattern that you can make it, by all means. But I'm leaning more personally in my own health coaching for folks. Let's support NRF2, Keep One, and let the body do it itself. My analogy is, I think you're better off to support your body to make it than to take it. Now,
very good.
Yeah.
Another tagline there.
Yes. So now, on the other hand, if somebody's massively inflamed and their glutathione is totally depleted, I'm a big fan of S-acetylglutathione for a couple weeks.
Okay.
Then
Fantastic.
Stop. Just don't keep taking it. Because, for example, if you take a perfectly healthy person and you start giving them insulin, their pancreas is going to quit. Start giving somebody thyroid meds, their thyroid can quit. So why would that the same thing happen if you start giving people massive amounts of glutathione? The body will stop making it potentially. Or if that doesn't happen, and again, I'm just speculating on that. I have no papers on that. But to me, it doesn't seem like a good idea to take something that your body should make. Put the raw ingredients there, stimulate NRF2 and keep one, and let the body do it itself.
That makes a lot of sense. You mentioned arginine.
Arginine, yes. And again, a lot of men want to build muscle or they want to improve their erectile function. And the reason they do that is because we need something called nitric oxide to dilate your blood vessels. Again, another Nobel Prize, I believe this was 1992, for the discovery of cardiovascular benefits of nitric oxide. Nitric oxide is a simple molecule that dilates the blood vessels. And that's why you'll hear people that have nitroglycerin with them. If they start getting some chest pain, they'll take that, stimulates the nitric oxide, they're better. Everybody hears about Viagra and Cialis. They block the breaking down of nitric oxide so a man can get an erection. It works as long as you have a little bit of nitric oxide, but you get to a point where sparing nothing is nothing, and then they don't work. So that's when they go to L-arginine. Now, L-arginine combines with something called tetrahydrobiopterin
BH4.
and the NOS enzyme, or BH4 tetrahydrobiopterin, to make nitric oxide. Now, if you have enough BH4 tetrahydrobiopterin and the NOS enzyme is working, that L-arginine will just beautifully turn into nitric oxide. Your blood pressure might come down, your muscles might build, and your erectile function might improve. However, if that BH4 is depleted, and that can be depleted for a lot of reasons, or the NOS genes are not working, or even lead or aluminum can block it, that L-arginine slams right into the free radical superoxide. Hate when that happens. So a guy wants to get muscles or improve his erectile function, and all he does is hurt. And I think that's why, again, speculative here, sometimes why you see viruses pop up with L-arginine, because you're making the superoxide, which makes the peroxynitrite that suppresses the immune system. So I'm a much bigger fan of supporting the NOS enzyme and then allowing the body to make its own nitric oxide rather than trying to force it. Or at least support the NOS enzyme, at least make sure you have enough BH4 before you take L-arginine. Again, 3D chess game played underwater. We can't, and there's been studies that have shown that, taking L-arginine can be detrimental to your health. So does that make L-arginine bad? No. It's a critical nutrient. It's when it's not used properly. And the final one I want to talk about is beta-carotene. In phase 2 of my study, we found that those with chronic Lyme disease had more of the BCMO1 genes. That is what takes beta-carotene, turns it into vitamin A. Vitamin A is needed to make ceruloplasmin, which is also involved with copper and iron. Now, if you have a bunch of genetic variants on the beta-carotene genes, that beta-carotene does not turn into vitamin A. This is many years ago, but they did a study of beta-carotene, and they found that some people got sicker the more beta-carotene they took. So we assumed we got to stop this study because taking beta-carotene's got to be bad for you. Again, oversimplification. I tend to think if we went back and see who did worse on beta-carotene, they likely had the genetic variants that they didn't turn it into vitamin A.
Wow.
And therefore the beta-carotene was bad for them. So these studies where you just take 500 or 1,000 people, randomly give them something, and then try to get some meaningful data from it, may not be effective data because, again, if you have your NOS genes working and you have enough BH4, arginine is going to be your friend. If those things are not happening, arginine is going to be your enemy.
So we talked earlier about people that have high levels of anxiety. You mentioned that they often then reach for GABA to try to calm themselves down, that may not always be a good thing to do. So is there a better strategy for dealing with higher levels of anxiety?
Sure. Well, anxiety can come from multiple things. I mean, it can come from your serotonin levels, can come from your dopamine levels, could come from just being fatigued. But many times we spoke about glutamate being high. So a lot of times people are anxious and they hear about GABA. So some well-meaning person says, oh, take some GABA and you'll feel better. Well, glutamate turns into GABA. So a lot of times I hear this, oh, I took GABA and I felt great for 2 weeks, then I felt worse. So again, if you start taking GABA, the body says, oh, I don't need to turn glutamate into GABA. So then your glutamate starts going up. So I'm a much bigger fan, here again, of supporting the glutamate to GABA conversion. The nutrient hinokial is absolutely incredible. Hinokial from magnolia bark supports glutamate to GABA conversion. And I have seen so many people with sleeping problems, anxiety problems, really seriously anxious, loving what hinokial does for them. So does L-theanine. I'm also a big fan of magnesium L-threonate. All of those support the natural production of GABA. Wow. So a lot of times when people have too much anxiety and too much glutamate, rather than giving them GABA, let's support glutamate to GABA conversion. Let's support the body's production of glutathione rather than force it with something. Because in some sense, some people that think they're doing natural things are still kind of playing medicine. Mm-hmm. And so the body has an innate intelligence, and we just have to figure that out and help it along. Take away all these things that we're exposed to. And again, for some people, that may mean reducing your iron. For other people, it may mean staying away from monosodium glutamate. For other people, that may mean going easy on dairy. For other people, that may mean let's stay away from anything that's not organically made. We got to go organic. So there isn't a one fix for all. There isn't you've got Epstein-Barr, Lyme disease, eat this food or don't eat that food. That'd be nice if it was so simple, but life isn't quite so accommodating.
That is absolutely true. So you are a naturopath, you are a product formulator, you've created software to help in this realm. I'd like to have the opportunity to hear a little bit about the software, the training that you do, the products that you've developed. I think there's a mix of practitioners and patients listening to the podcast. So how do they learn a little bit more about the work you're doing, get involved in that to be able to help their own patients?
Sure. So I'm going to be speaking now just to health practitioners. I know there's a lot of genetic programs on the internet that anybody can put their 23andMe in and use. I just work exclusively with healthcare practitioners. So I've created a software that's cloud-based called MethylGenetic Nutrition Analysis. It's located at www.dnasupplementation.com. And if any person is listening to this and thinks they're going to go there and upload their genome, it's not going to work. Okay, you have to apply for an account. You have to prove that you're a health practitioner. We want to see a license or a website or something that you're a practitioner. Then you can have access to the software. And we just hit the 10,000 gene mark today of things that we're getting from 23andMe. And then this is like the 3D chess game. So I train classes. I train doctors all over the country. I'm going to be in Chicago the end of September 17. Probably people will be listening to this after that. We're going to be having a new schedule for 2018 coming out very soon. It's a 3-day class that I co-teach with Emily Givler, one of my practitioners here, and it's the fast track. But then we also have online certification. Now, again, you have to be qualified to do this. You can't just say, hey, I'd like to be a DNA coach. You need to be a dietitian or a doctor or a chiropractor or an acupuncturist or something that allows this to be in your scope of practice. But I have a certification program that's online. Right now, there's going to be 11 modules. There's a test after each one. You then have to do a case study. And right now, even without advertising, I have over 500 health practitioners taking my course. So health practitioners only. Please, if you're not a health practitioner, please don't try to pretend you are and go on the website to get access to the software. You can have a list of practitioners who will run it for you, but I work exclusively with healthcare practitioners. I know there's others who work with the general public, but I felt this is so complex that you really need somebody trained in this because it's not just measuring MTHFR and taking methylfolate. It's quite complex if you really want to learn it. And I'm only interested in working with health practitioners who are serious. Somebody thinks that, I go to Bob's software, I plug it in, and it's going to give me all the answers. Please don't bother. You've got to learn. You got to study. Software gives you guidance, but you still have to be the clinician and do that. So it's DNAsupplementation.com for healthcare practitioners who would like to add this to what they do.
Fantastic. And then maybe a little bit, my understanding is that you've also created a line of supplements that are available to support many of the genetic variants that we talked about here today.
Yes, there's a company called Professional Health Products. And again, they only sell to health professionals. It's not available on the web. I know other people have done that. They've created their own line. It's on the web and you can buy it. That's their market. That's fine. I've stuck to health professionals. So I am the formulator for Professional Health Products. I don't own their company. I don't have an interest in them. But I was one of their customers. And it's a small family-owned business. And the gentleman's been doing it's been in 40 years. And I started talking about this stuff. And he said, well, do you think there's a need for product? And I said, well, sure there is, because nobody's done this stuff. So we formulated things like glutamate scavenger, peroxynitrite scavenger, terms that you've never heard of. We're coming up with a probiotic to balance the biome. There's 50 products that are used by health professionals. So again, you won't find them online. You can't, the general public can't go buy it. They're only given by a professional health professional who's either certified or licensed to do this work. And so I'm the formulator, but it's not my company. I just do the research and then say, I think we have a need for fill in the blank. For example, like we just came up with a homeopathic for clearing hydrogen peroxide. We've just come up with a product called Autophagy Assist that has the resveratrol, the turmeric, the berberine. It'll be unparalleled, I think, in any supplement that's out there to calm down mTOR and support autophagy. So that's the kind of things I do to keep myself busy. So.
And the cool part is you're still having a lot of fun, I can tell.
I'm having a blast. Yeah.
That's great.
I'll be 63 soon, and I decided I'll slow down in about 20 years.
Nice. That's fantastic. So anything else on phases 1 through 4 that you want to mention before we wrap up with my final question?
No, I think that's about it. But if I could just tie it all in, what I'm real excited about is everything that I've been doing with methylation, with glutamate, it fit perfectly into the mTOR autophagy paradigm. So I'm now taking my whole practice and all my teaching and tying it into how does this stimulate or slow down mTOR? How does this stimulate or enhance autophagy or weaken it? And now all my classes, the last one that I did for doctors in San Diego, that was the whole overriding factor. How do all of these things tie into mTOR and autophagy? And I think we're going to find that was the missing link, how all of these tie together. And it's very complex, and there isn't a pill, there isn't a thing to do. But I believe the environment has changed so much that we're going to have to make these changes, or some pretty bad things are going to start happening to us.
Some pretty bad things are already starting to happen to us. Yes, I agree. It's concerning for sure. What are some of the things that Bob Miller does on a daily basis in support of your own health?
Oh, okay. Well, I'm a genetic disaster. As I said, I was almost dead when I had small children in my early 30s. So I do the intermittent fasting. Okay. And I've just started that within the last couple of months. I support my NRF2. I support my Keep 1. I take glutamate scavenger products before going to bed. I'll support the energy production inside the cells with a product called electron transport. I keep the gut healed down with things called histamine scavenger. I take the DAO enzyme whenever I have a histamine food. And in my office, I have a lot of toys. Tree of Life Health is my office, tolhealth.com. We have, pulsed electromagnetic field. We have, salt chamber. We have foot baths, all those kind of things, sauna. That old adage, the difference between the men and the boys is the price of their toys. And, so we have a lot of toys here, and hyperbaric oxygen, hydro massage chair. So I try to do each of those on a daily basis and just having fun, talking to my clients. I usually see people, about 10 hours a day talking to folks, and that keeps the brain sharp. And I just consider it an honor, a privilege to be able to be the person that can give hope to some of these folks that never had any hope. And particularly ironic as a traditional naturopath, which years back used to be, the laughing stock, oh yeah, one of those guys, to be able to, make a contribution to humanity. And my goal is that, someday when the books are written on functional medicine, there might be a line or two. One final thought, if I can.
Sure.
In my Chicago class, we're going to be having a special surprise, and I can't say what it is now, but we're actually coming up with the name of a genetic pattern that we're going to introduce there, where it's related to the iron or copper oxidized, the NRF2 weakness, the autophagy weakness, and the glutamate excess. And we're actually going to be calling it something, and we'll see if that name sticks.
Nice.
And it has nothing to do with Bob or Miller. Okay, so
Awesome.
but it'll be quite surprising. It'll be quite touching. And if we speak again, like when we speak, I think I'm coming to your event in April.
Mm-hmm.
We'll be introducing it, and we're going to see if we can coin a phrase that relates to how these dysregulations from our environment are now creating these conditions that allows Lyme and or autism or pandas, all these other things to exist. So we'll see if my name sticks. We'll see.
So for those people listening, just to get a sense for how well Bob Miller's brain actually does work, I think it's about 9 p.m. his time. So he's already had a long day and is still doing really, really well.
Started at 8 this morning. Yes.
Wow. One of the things that's enjoyable for me about this podcast is I always love it when I have a guest that then I want to go watch my own podcast again, just to pick up more pearls and gems and all the things that you threw out. So I thought it was just absolutely fantastic. I really enjoyed it. Bob Miller is coming to speak at a conference in Chicago next April as well with the Forum for Integrative Medicine. I'm excited to have him at that event and also learning more. And by then, I'm sure he's going to have even more of the puzzle pieces put together. So I want to thank you for spending time today, sharing with us on the podcast, for all the work that you're doing. I appreciate it. I know that it's complex work. I've heard very, very positive things about your work from both Dr. Klinghardt and Dr. Christine Schaffner. They certainly value your work as well. And so for those of us that have struggled with or are struggling with chronic illness, I just appreciate those heroes out there like yourself that are really attempting to make a big difference and actually doing it. So thank you very much for being on the show today.
Well, my pleasure. I'm not sure I'm a hero. I think I'm just a geek, but
well, it was fun.
It was fun as well. Let me just talk about what we're going to hopefully have in April. Sure. We're looking at the FOXO genes and the CERT3 and 5 genes and how they tie into all of this as well. So that's by April, we should have that information, and maybe that'll be phase 5 in our Lyme study.
Nice. Thank you so much for being here today, Bob Miller. I appreciate it very much. Have a great weekend ahead.
You as well. It's been my pleasure. You're doing a great job interviewing, and
thanks.
Perhaps we can do it again.
Thank you.
To learn more about today's guest, visit NutriGeneticResearch.org. That's NutriGeneticResearch.org. For personal consultations with Bob Miller, visit TOLHealth.com. That's TOL Health, as in Tree of Life Health.com. TOLHealth.com. Practitioners may learn more about Dr. Bob Miller's work from MethylGenetic Nutrition Classes.com. That's MethylGenetic Nutrition Classes.com, or DNA Supplementation.com. That's DNA Supplementation.com. I appreciate your support of the Better Health Guy blogcasts series. If you'd like to follow me, you can find me on Facebook and Twitter as Better Health Guy. The show can be found on YouTube, iTunes, Google Play, and Stitcher. If you'd like to support the show, please visit betterhealthguy.com/donate. And if you'd like to be added to my newsletter, please visit betterhealthguy.com/newsletters. I'm looking forward to many more shows ahead and appreciate your interest.
Thanks for listening to this Better Health Guy blogcast with Scott, your Better Health Guy. To check out additional shows and learn more about Scott's personal journey to better health, please visit betterhealthguy.com.